These are the 10 most terrifying women's prisons on Earth. Places where women are forced into conditions that strip away their very humanity. What happens at the top spot will completely shatter your perception of reality. The first entry, Tadmor Prison. In May of 2015, when ISIS militants captured Palmyra in Syria, one of the very first things they did was blow up Tadmor Prison. What kind of place could inspire such absolute, deep-seated hatred? Tadmor Prison sat isolated in the desert near Palmyra, roughly 125 miles from Damascus. While many know Palmyra for its ancient Greco-Roman ruins, for most Syrians, the mere mention of Tadmor sends chills down their spine. Between 1971 and 2000, under the brutal regime of Hafez al-Assad, thousands of political dissidents suffered unimaginable, inhumane treatment here. They weren't just tortured and humiliated. Many were executed without ever seeing a trial. For female prisoners, the reality was sickening. They were crammed into tiny, filthy, poorly ventilated cells with absolutely zero basic sanitation. Extreme overcrowding meant privacy didn't exist, and supplies of food and water were dangerously scarce. Worse still, female inmates faced constant public degradation designed to shatter their dignity and psychological resolve. At Tadmor, even making eye contact was treated as an unpardonable sin. Torture was a daily routine, to the point where death became a mercy. Many prisoners openly prayed for God to end their suffering. Tadmor represents a bloody chapter in Syrian history, standing as a dark symbol of authoritarian dehumanization. While the atrocities slowed after Hafez al-Assad's death in 2000, the prison remains a permanent nightmare in the minds of those who survived it. The second entry, Antanamora Prison. Next is Antanamora Prison. Located on the outskirts of Madagascar's capital, Antananarivo. Its name might not sound familiar, but its reality is bone-chilling operating. Since the late 19th century, it was originally a men-only facility. Today, it has ballooned into a massive compound holding both men and women, built to hold around 800 inmates. Antanamora currently packs in 4,357 people, and the number of female prisoners has spiked to nearly 500. In this severely overcrowded, biohazardous environment, women face unique horror. On top of physical violence, they deal with deep-seated gender inequality. The agony is unimaginable for mothers. Approximately 60 PHNTRM of the female inmates are either pregnant when locked up or have their children with them. This means they are forced to raise babies in the most brutal conditions imaginable. Compounding the nightmare, guards routinely exploit these vulnerable women. Reports indicate that female prisoners are forced to do hard labor just to barter for food and basic necessities. As overcrowding worsens, sanitation has completely collapsed. Medical care is practically non-existent. Over the past few years, infectious diseases have ripped through the wards. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, and cholera run rampant. Data shows that these preventable diseases account for a staggering 1/3 of all deaths in the prison annually. The third entry, Indiana Women's Prison. You might have watched the hit show Orange is the New Black, but the environment depicted on TV pales in comparison to actual history. The concept of a standalone women's prison is relatively modern. Originally, female inmates were just kept in segregated sections of male facilities. Then, in 1869, the Indiana Women's Prison was built as the first dedicated female correctional facility in the United States, welcoming its first inmates 4 years later. Back then, the primitive conditions looked nothing like modern penitentiaries. Security was minimal. Inmates worked alongside chaplains, cooking and doing manual labor as an alternative to 23-hard daily solitary confinement. The original intent wasn't raw punishment, but rehabilitation, turning them into productive citizens. After all, most women entering the system weren't cold-blooded killers. They were young girls caught up in bootlegging and vice during Prohibition. However, between 1980 and 2006, the female inmate population here skyrocketed by a staggering 800 PHNTRM. Shockingly, 2/3 of these women were from minority communities, mostly locked up for non-violent offenses like drug possession. Yet behind these minor charges lay heartbreaking complexities. For instance, up to 90 PHNTRM of the women convicted of murdering men had actually killed their long-term abusers. While public perception of female crime has evolved, inside these cold walls, many were treated as irredeemable, facing systemic injustice. For these women, the prison became a devastating trap where violence and bullying run rampant. driving many to extreme behaviors just to survive the mental oppression. The fourth entry, Bangkwang Central Prison. Rumor has it that this next location has one of the highest mortality rates in the world, a living hell with zero escape. This is Bangkwang Central Prison, located just north of Bangkok, Thailand. Bangkwang is infamous for its leg irons. Inmates had their legs heavy shackled, severely restricting their movement. Many spent their entire lives in these chains, unable to take a normal step. For female inmates with less physical strength, the heavy iron caused severe muscle atrophy and permanent bone damage over time. This barbaric practice wasn't officially banned until 2013, but the chains were just the beginning. The sanitary conditions at Bangkwang are horrifying. The water is contaminated and the food has virtually no nutritional value. Prisoners are typically fed just one meal a day consisting of low-grade rice, a few vegetables, and a tiny bit of meat. In stark contrast, prison administrators live in luxury. The contrast with the outside world is deeply ironic. Just beyond the walls is a bustling, prosperous city, while inside is a pit of filth. The death rate here is catastrophic. Statistics show that over the past few decades, roughly 40 PHN-TRM of inmates died within their first 3 years of confinement from disease, starvation, violence, or suicide. Most of these deaths trace directly back to the total lack of medical facilities. Minor ailments become fatal due to neglected treatment. Furthermore, the labor intensity expected from these women breaks human limits, completely shattering their physical and mental well-being. The fifth entry, Kanator Prison. In 1989, Egypt was shaken by a massive prison riot. Over 1,000 inmates clashed violently with guards, leaving at least 50 dead and hundreds injured. The cause was simple: absolute outrage over the horrific conditions and extreme oppression inside Kanator Prison. Kanator is one of the most notorious prisons in Egyptian history, located on the west bank of the Nile, about 25 miles north of Cairo. Originally built by British colonizers in the 19th century as a military prison, it was later used by the Egyptian government to house political prisoners and violent offenders. Despite multiple expansions, its terrifying reputation never changed. Independent investigations reveal that the facilities are primitive. Inmates are packed into suffocating cells with barely any light or ventilation. Originally designed for 800 people, the population exploded to around 4,000 by the year 2000. This meant each inmate had less than 11 square feet of personal space. Food and water are heavily rationed, and living in such filth makes disease and malnutrition a standard part of life. Survivors have exposed the extreme measures used inside, particularly against women. Human rights organizations report that many inmates undergo secret interrogations and illegal detention, sometimes disappearing permanently without any legal process. Even worse, Kanator is a breeding ground for corruption. Guards and administrators maintain deep ties to organized crime. Insiders reveal that high-ranking officials have actively trafficked female inmates to criminal syndicates, while allowing gangs to run drug smuggling operations right inside the prison walls. The sixth entry, Patari Prison. Today, Patari Prison stands as a historical museum, attracting tourists and history buffs. But the darkness of its past still haunts the local memory. Built in the 19th century, it began as a military fortress for Tsarist Russia before becoming a prison for criminals and political dissidents. The architecture itself was designed to terrify. Constructed from heavy stone and brick, surrounded by massive walls and tiny narrow slits for windows, the interior was kept in near total darkness. The design aimed to inflict total psychological isolation. Many cells lacked any form of ventilation, subjecting prisoners to wretched conditions for years. To this day, you can still see scratches and bloodstains left by inmates on the walls, silent testaments to their agony. The prison basement remains the most haunted zone, where visitors still report an inexplicable freezing aura. Making matters worse, this was a mixed-gender facility where women faced double the torment. Female prisoners were subjected to coordinated abuse from both male guards and male inmates. They were often locked away in tiny pitch, black solitary units, with no privacy or soundproofing, spending their days straining for a sliver of light through the cracks. The psychological toll was so severe that many chose to end their own lives. The seventh entry, Korchak Prison. Located in the desolate Variman region southeast of Tehran, Iran, this next facility sits on an abandoned desert airfield. The climate is brutal, the landscape is barren, and it holds hundreds of women convicted of violent crimes in conditions that fall dangerously below the UN minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners. This is Korchak Prison. Korchak's 7 structures pack in over 2,000 inmates, with 200 to 300 women crammed into each section. Personal space is virtually non-existent. A typical cell is only about 97 square feet, where 9 inmates are jammed onto 3 triple bunk beds, while 2 or 3 more are forced to sleep on the floor, often right next to the toilet door, out of the entire 16,000 square foot compound. The actual living quarters make up less than 4,300 square feet. This leaves each prisoner with less than 2 square feet of mobility. Inmates cannot sit or eat anywhere except on their beds. Their entire lives happen on a mattress. With no proper ventilation, the prison becomes a freezing icebox in the winter and a suffocating oven in the summer. Because it is surrounded by swamplands and stagnant wastewater, the facility is constantly infested with insects and rats. Sanitation is a nightmare. For every 100 to 150 women, there are only 10 toilets, and usually only 3 or 4 actually function. Showers are incredibly scarce, and hot water is strictly limited. Women go so long without bathing that skin diseases run rampant, exacerbated by the fact that the bathroom floors are permanently flooded with contaminated water that inmates must walk through in tattered slippers. Violence and psychological torture are heavily weaponized by staff. According to external reports, women who protest these conditions are thrown into solitary confinement blocks alongside severely mentally ill patients as a tactic to completely break their sanity. The 8th entry, Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women. Located on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama, the exterior of this facility looks completely ordinary, almost peaceful. But if you dig into its history, you will uncover a dark legacy of secrets. This is the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women, one of the most notorious female prisons in the United States. Built in 1942, it was originally designed as a modern correctional facility. However, over the decades, it became synonymous with horror. Privacy does not exist. The crumbling infrastructure and hazardous sanitation are worse than anyone can imagine. Designed to hold just 400 inmates, the facility was forced to house over 700 women, leading to severe overcrowding and rapid decay. The most shocking aspect of Tutwiler is its history of systemic abuse. For decades, female inmates faced rampant predatory behavior from prison staff. While countless complaints and lawsuits were filed against the administration and guards over the years, the vast majority were covered up or ignored, silencing the victims. With no way to protect themselves, female prisoners were frequently coerced into inappropriate relationships with guards just to survive. The physical and emotional trauma drove many to the brink of self-harm, while leadership allowed a culture of corruption and abuse of power to hide the crimes from the public eye. The 9th entry, Valley State Prison for Women. This next facility once held a massive segment of the female inmate population, keeping these women completely isolated from the world. Yet despite total isolation, the prison averaged roughly 120 pregnancies a month, resulting in over 300 births every single year, a statistic that baffled the public. Located in the heart of California, this is Valley State Prison for Women, which has since been converted into a male facility. However, its history of treating women inhumanely remains deeply controversial. Originally opened as a rehabilitative facility with a design capacity for 2,200 inmates, the population exploded to over 4,000 by the late 1990s. This extreme overcrowding triggered a collapse of basic infrastructure, a severe shortage of medical care, and a dangerous spike in violence among inmates. The women had to endure assaults not just from other prisoners, but systematic exploitation from the guards. Due to corruption within the administration, investigations were routinely buried, leaving victims with no access to justice. It is almost impossible to comprehend. But inside these walls, if a female inmate requested something as basic as a roll of toilet paper, guards would openly demand a quid pro quo, asking, "What are you going to do for me first?" Everyone knew exactly what that meant. To get basic hygiene products, women had to trade their bodies, sometimes receiving nothing more than a single piece of chewing gum in return. They were treated like circus animals kept for the guards' amusement. Every single day was a battle to trade compliance for soap, sanitary pads, and food. In a bizarre twist of irony, if an inmate became pregnant, her treatment suddenly improved. She was exempted from hard labor, given better rations, and granted a private room for women trapped in miserable, overcrowded cells. This created a toxic incentive to find ways to get pregnant just to escape the daily misery. The 10th entry, Diyarbakir Prison. How deeply despised must a prison be to actually fuel the rise of a political movement, igniting a conflict between the PKK and the Turkish government that persists to this day? Look no further than the infamous Diyarbakir Prison. Located in southeastern Turkey, Diyarbakir became a house of horrors following the 1980 Turkish military coup. Tens of thousands of political prisoners were thrown into its cells, many based on mere suspicion of anti-government activity without a shred of evidence. By tradition, inmates underwent a horrific initiation before even entering the cells. Guards threw them into pits filled with human excrement. And that was just the mildest part of the torture. What followed was a non-stop onslaught of brutality. For female prisoners, the experience at Diyarbakir was pure agony. These women were either connected to political movements or were ordinary citizens swept up in military raids. The prison was never structurally designed to hold women on a large scale. The lack of space meant inmates endured constant physical oppression. Furthermore, the administration used targeted gender discrimination to break them, withholding basic hygiene products, like toilet paper and clean water to compound their suffering. Deployed as pawns in a political war, these women faced flagrant public humiliation. They were subjected to intense psychological warfare during prolonged solitary confinement, tortured until they signed false confessions or broke down completely. The mental devastation left scars that many could never heal. That wraps up our look into these harrowing facilities. Out of the 10 terrifying women's prisons we covered today, which one shocked you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.